So, today we're going to be talking about the business value of design. They asked me to give a small introduction to me because I'm not completely world famous yet. So I put that at the start and we get it out of the way and we can talk about what you're actually interested in, which is design and how you win at design. Yay. Yes, that works. Okay, good. So I'm not actually a designer by training, and I think that makes it a bit easier to understand this topic because most people who should be interested in design should not be designers. If it's just for designers, then it's not going to go anywhere that it hasn't already gone. So my background was I studied history, I then became a history teacher, and I had no thought about design or anything like this. And then I got a call out of the blue to go and work as a speechwriter and a political strategist. So I did that in the UK for a while. And it was in that time when I really sort of started to get first interested in design. I was working in a unit called the Prime Minister's Strategy Unit, and I was very excited to be there. And we were working on homelessness for some time there. And I said, fantastic, such an important topic. We should definitely be solving this. So, when are we going to go and live with some homeless people? And they're like, what are you talking about? And I said, well, I'm not homeless, and none of my friends are homeless. I don't think, to my shame, I probably never spent more than about 30 seconds talking to a homeless person, so I don't think I really know what I'm talking about. And I said, oh, no problem. We've got all these reports, and there's these academics, and this lobby group, so we totally know what we're doing. I said, yeah, but none of those people have been homeless either. In fact, most of them studied classics at Cambridge with me, which is like not really knowing about homelessness. So that kind of set me on this journey to discover how could we design government and public services with the people who actually use them. And I didn't know about design then, but I gradually found that that was design. And Christian was a pivotal guy in this movement. So that was politics early. I then went into running bits of public service. And when I was there, I did a thing called the Crime Opportunity Lab, which was an attempt to try and change the way that we treated people who were committing lots and lots of crime by living with them and understanding really what their life was like. So we had teams who went and lived with people who were addicted to crack and tried to understand why do they keep offending so much, why was the public service not helping them. And then I thought, this is really fantastic, we've got to do more of this. I went to McKinsey because I wanted to become a boss of things. And when I got to McKinsey, one of the projects I did was on trying to redesign the process for applying for public benefits in the US, in Detroit. And I'll show you a picture about what we were trying to do in a second. But I was still doing basically normal McKinsey work. At that stage, McKinsey wasn't hugely aware or interested in design, I felt, or at least I couldn't find those people. So in frustration, I left. I went off to America, to Stanford, and I worked at the D School, which some of you might know about. It's the design school of Stanford University. And it's kind of, some people might say, the home of design thinking, or it's sort of a little bit where it started. Well, others may disagree, but anyway, they do a lot there. So I was a lecturer there, and I just finished there, and by that time, McKinsey had caught up and got really excited about design. So when I rejoined the firm again, I came into the design division. That's what I do now. And this picture is an example of what we were doing on redesigning. This is the benefits form for applying for public assistance in Michigan. And as you can see, it's pretty long. So this is one of the things that we redesigned. Anyway, today we're going to be talking about 5 topics. Can you see the screen? We blocked out the beautiful view here, but still a beautiful view here, right? So we're going to be talking about how to win using design. And there are 5 elements. First of all, we're going to set up a little bit about, make sure we're all on the same page about when we talk about design, what we mean, because it means kind of different things to different people. Then we're going to talk a little bit about why design thinking has become so important to business now, and why it wasn't, say, in 1950 or 1990. Then we're going to be talking about just how important it is. So you may or may not have read the Business Value of Design report. I would excuse you if you haven't read the whole report because it's quite big. But I'll talk you through a bit about the method and what we discovered. And then we'll get into the actual how. So how can you, as leaders of your companies, win using design? And then we'll do a sort of double click, a little bit more depth on the leadership and analytical and metrics aspects of that. Sound fantastic? It sounds fantastic, doesn't it? I think so, yes. Okay, good. And also, I don't know if Danes are like Swedes. No, I know they're not like... but I don't know if Danes are like Swedes in the aspect that they don't like to kind of break cover and ask the first question. So you have 2 options. You can either put your hand up as we go, or, because I used to be a school teacher, I could pick on you. So if you don't want that to happen, maybe you should put your hand up as we go, or at the end we'll have some Q&A. Right, that's enough fannying around. Let's go. So, what do we mean when we talk about design? Well, when we talk about design, we often are thinking about something that's a little bit like this. Lovely piece of Danish design there, Anna Jacobsen chairs. Or something that's more like this. And this is also design, that counts. But when we think about design in a business context, we're really thinking about three kind of terrains of design and two kind of fundamental methods. So the three terrains, one is stuff like this, products. So industrial engineering type products, or it can be consumer products, but physical things. Or digital experiences, obviously been a big growth area in the last 10 years or so. So shopping on Amazon, for instance. Or services, which is the bit that lots of people are less familiar with. And service is a bit of a vague word, but it means anything that you're kind of experiencing. So a hotel, for instance, is something that you experience. Yeah, there's some products there, which is like the bed that you're going to lie on. Somebody designed that. But the experience of the check-in, the decor, the way people talk to you, what's the restaurant service like? Do you get lost on your way to find the gym? Do you not even bother to find the gym? That's all part of the service design. So these are three areas we'll be thinking about. And increasingly, we find that all these things are merging. They're kind of becoming interlinked. So a good example, I think, is airlines. They're not always very good at doing this, but they do have products and services and digital experiences all combining. So you might start with some digital stuff, you're Googling and you find them, then you try and book using their website, and you want to change your booking and it's confusing. Then you get the app, or you check in at the airport. There's a bit more digital going on there that might be also a bit confusing. Then we get to the product. So there's a kind of product which is the actual aeroplane that you're in. And there's products within that, like the bad food that you might get or the nice food that you might get. And that might be wrapped in some service, which is that the person who's serving you is nice to you as they serve it to you, or not nice to you. And then you've got things like baggage reclaim or the long queue that you're stuck in at the border and immigration. So that's a kind of typical example of the way that, although we used to have in 1950, people are like, I am a product designer and I make chairs. And there's nothing digital in it, and there's no service. I just make it, that's it. And we have people who maybe were thinking a little bit about service, that's a bit newer, and obviously digital is newer. Now these things are really all coming and infusing together and blending together. Do you know all of this? Should I just go? No, you don't know. Okay, that's good. So these things are kind of starting to merge, and that's why we need to be good at not just doing product design if we're a product company, but everything design. And not just doing a bit of service if we're a service company, but everything design. And so now you see that that many products are quite infused with services, and that could be, I mean, we picked some consumer examples here like Sonos, where they make great speakers, but really it's all about how easy is it to connect the app and set it up and change volume in different rooms, things like that. Or Spotify, where they embed their product in lots of other people's products. But you also see it in something like Rolls-Royce making aero engines. They make the engine, they sell it to you, but really it's about how can they help you make your airline more efficient by understanding the data that comes off the engine as a kind of digital aspect, and then blending that into how you change the maintenance of the engine, which is a sort of service aspect. So these things are kind of coming together. And to some extent, when we think about how you actually do design, there is one option which is don't, but you can't kind of really not to design a product. If you make it, or if you make a service, you might have sort of designed it badly because you didn't use any kind of method, but it still has a sort of a design, it still has an experience. You can't really avoid that. You might not hire any ethnographers when you make your new hotel, and no designers, but you still make it and people still use it, so there still is an experience. The question is not really, is there design in your world? It's, are you applying good design techniques to what you're trying to create or not? So I'd suggest you should apply them. And simplifying lots and lots of books, literature, and 4 years of taking design school and that kind of thing. There are really two things, I think, when I teach design that I try and explain to people that it's all about if they're encountering it for the first time. So the first half is the discovery half. So in the discovery half, good design is about the user, and you spend time with them. So that doesn't mean a focus group where you ask them abstract questions like, what's really important to you? And like, I don't know. It's observational and it's living with them. So the kind of techniques we use, we might be doing ethnography, so it's a sub-discipline of anthropology, which is about intensively and carefully and non-intrusively observing people and trying to understand what their real life is like, because they may not always know what their problem is or their answer is exactly, but it'll be revealed by the way they behave. So we observe. We also do immersion, which is when we go and actually try and do the service or the product ourselves, use it ourselves. I was teaching a course last year on redesigning the justice system in California, and part of that is about adopting people. or becoming a guardian. If you're a grandparent and maybe you need to become a guardian of your niece or your grandchild or something like that. So I said to the team, right, your next 2 hours of today's lesson, you need to become a guardian for an imaginary child. So imagine you're a 65-year-old grandmother and you need to become a guardian for your granddaughter. Go. And they're like, well, I don't know what to do. I was like, exactly. They don't know what to do either. But go. What would you do? And they're like, oh, well, I will Google, how can I become a guardian? So that sounds reasonable. So they Googled, how can I become a guardian? Well, what happens then? You get a really nice website that tells you how to become a guardian? No. You get 900 pages of Google telling you how to join Guardians of the Galaxy fan clubs. But that's what would happen if you do it, right? if you are a grandmother. So you can either observe a grandmother getting confused, or you can try it and learn a bit yourself by doing it. And then the other technique we have is sort of structured interviewing. But the interview needs to be like really open. You can't be like, do you love my specific product? You have to be a little bit more open than that to draw out insights. So there's some skill in that. Anyway, spending time. So when we did the redesign the benefits form in Detroit, we went and lived with people who were trying to do this, not just when they're doing the service right then, not just when they were filling in the form, although that was really interesting, but in their wider life, because you see something broader. And no service or product exists just on its own. And if we just sort of test, like, what do people think of our product when they're using it right now? Well, they have a wider life, and it's like, how does this product fit into their wider life? So you want to see all of that. I have a medium-length anecdote I could tell now, but I'm going to keep going, and maybe I'll tell it later if you get excited about it. And then, so that's the discovery. Then we know something about the user. We then need to do some solutioning for them, making the answer. But we don't do that with like, let's do all the discovery and then let's do all the answer. That's a kind of waterfall. In digital terms, you call that a waterfall way of trying to solve the problem. We want an iterative way of solving the problem. So that's a kind of test and learn process. And then that's where it kind of intersects with what people do out in Silicon Valley and tech companies, where they release a beta version. But you can do a beta version of anything. You can do a beta version of a paper form or of a hotel or of an airline experience. So you want to do a sort of test version, which may not be absolutely great, but which helps you get some feedback. So early versions often. So, if I was Darth Vader, I might be trying to name my new concept, and I might start with Bad Star and test that with some people, and maybe not, Bad Star is not the right name, and a Naughty Star perhaps might be a better name, some feedback, and eventually a Death Star. Yeah, that's great, that's what we should call it. So you want to have a bit of test and learn with the users and see what they tell you they like and they don't like. Excellent. Any questions on this? Yes.
In your opinion, from getting all the insights and new knowledge about what customers or users might need, and then actually transform it into some sort of concepts.
Yes.
In my experience, some of the most difficult part of the design process is actually there in transforming, actually getting, especially people from inside a company or an organization, to look for new insights and not just finding the kind of knowledge or data that actually,
just
convince them of what they already know.
Yes.
Do you have some reflections on, how might you get people to look for the new?
Sure.
Not that new is necessarily the right thing, but
yes. Gold star for this lady for asking the first question, and secondly, it's a good question. So the question, in case you couldn't hear, was how do you get people in your company to actually find new insights and not just churn up what they already kind of thought before? So I think one part is sort of coming back to this very direct contact with the user. So I gave the example when I was doing this homelessness thing, and people were like, oh no, I've looked into it, I've read this report, which really puts a very big distance between you and what the users actually like. Whereas when we were doing the reducing drug-driven crime in London project that I mentioned, we took policemen and we were like, we're going to live with crack addicts for 24 hours, and you're going to, it's going to hit you in the face, right? It's a visceral experience, and I think often people the obstruction goes away at that point. So before we did that, where we sat around in a meeting and I said, okay, we're going to try and reduce crime. Everybody said, we can't reduce crime. The problem is the housing people. They don't do the housing job. The housing people are like, no, it's the health people. They should be providing more drug support. No, it's your fault. Like, they've been having that conversation for like 50 years, basically. And I thought the project's going to fail. So we went and took them to see the ethnography, some of them. And then other people, we showed a little short video of what the lives of the people we were trying to help with, which was very sad, to be honest. And then we brought in one of the guys who'd actually we'd done the ethnography with, and we thought, this is him, this is Mark. And most of the people in that room, even though they worked on criminal justice policy or public policy, they'd never ever met a criminal, not like met them, talked to them about crime. So I think, and after that, the chief of the police stood up and he said, look, if we don't solve this, I don't know why I'm in government at all. This is what we exist for. So it really changed the tone of the conversation. So my advice to you would be, find users and don't show in the board. We interviewed them and here's a summary of what they said. Throw them in there. And that's why things like the immersion, like they did with the Guardians of the Galaxy thing, is kind of good because it just really hits you. So I think that's one element, is make them be there. I think it can also help to, when you're moving from that insight into how do you make that into a new idea rather than the same idea all over again. To test concepts, we're getting slightly more technical on design techniques here, but that's okay. To test concepts not by saying I heard a lot and I'm going to make an early version of what I think is right, but to test concepts by making something a bit extreme in different dimensions. So just to give you an example, when we were doing, I don't think there is a back button here. Maybe there is a back button, yeah. When we were doing this, we had a hypothesis that this black and white form, which was in font size 2 and incredibly hard to read, that if we increased the font size, that would help, and if we made it more colourful, that would help. So we didn't say, okay, we're going to make a colourful, bigger font one. Do you like it? Because they would have said yes, and then we wouldn't really know if it was the bigger font or the colour that was better. So we made one which was more colourful, but the same font, and one which was better font, but no colour. And we said, what do you like about these? And they were then able to say, well, actually, I don't care at all about the font. I care about the colour. Oh, okay, that's interesting. So the prototypes are they're not really early versions. They're kind of learning vehicles that test a hypothesis. So you're my hypothesis is, you're going to love it if I make it blue. So make one that's blue. And sometimes when we're doing prototypes, we talk about works like, looks like, sounds like maybe, prototypes. So if we had a different setup, I would do a little exercise with you where we'd make a pepper grinder. And I would pick half the room to make a looks like prototype and half to make a works like prototype out of some bits and bobs I'd give you. And usually it's pipe cleaners and staples and some plastic and tape and some cardboard and things. And people make the looks like prototype. It looks like a beautiful, elegant pepper grinder that they might make out of plasticine or something. Be I'm thinking of making something like this. But it doesn't grind any pepper, it just looks like it, right? And a works like prototype would be to take a plastic bag, put a golf ball in it, some peppercorns, poke some holes in it, and smack it against the table, and ground pepper will come out. And you're we think it should be something that works like this. It'll look different, but it should work like this. So you can that helps you draw out test different parts of it. Whereas if you're just I heard everything, I think it's going to be this, and I'm going to make an early version which is not so beautiful, but it's going to be the early version. And then you can get a bit locked into one pathway. Happy? Jättebra. I don't know what that is in Danish, but maybe it's the same. Yeah. I've only been in Sweden for 9 weeks, so I'm still lärare. Jag läser barnböcker. Okay, yes. So, anything else at this point? No? Good. So, that's a little bit about what we mean when we talk about design in business. So now let's talk about why this is hip and cool and important now. Well, basically, I blame this guy, to summarize it. This is Steve Jobs. So, I could talk about this for ages, but let's just talk about 3 bits about why I think now is the moment. And I'm going to use the idea of the iPhone as a sort of simplification way of explaining it. So, one bit is about expectations. So, basically, the digital revolution has made a lot of things so much easier than they were before that now everybody expects it to be easier, right? And if your product is not easier, then there'll be a kind of clash. They'll be like, oh, this is like something from 1994. I hate it. Especially millennials who don't remember what 1994 was. I do. It was a great time. Listening to Umbot by Hanson. It was... Anyway, so the expectation change is really important. It's so much easier to do things now. The second thing I think, which I also blame on this guy, is this kind of what we call omni-channel, blending across lots of different channels, which the iPhone is kind of part of that, I suppose, because it can be part of your digital life, but it's also a little bit part of your real life, your sort of service experience life, like you might use the map to navigate somewhere. And you can start to blend different things together. Like I remember in about 2008, I got this app which it turned the location on. When you're on the train and it went near your stop, it would put the alarm on so you didn't sleep past your stop. Now that sounds quite obvious, an easy thing to do, but I was like, this is so amazing. It's like the digital thing is in my life, in my actual life, not when I'm typing on a computer. So this kind of blending of omni-channel means that everything's got to have a bit of everything in it now. And the third thing is that not just phones, but many devices, generating so much more data, it's much cheaper for us to store the data and it's much easier for us to crunch it. And that means we're getting so much new insight from big data. And I could also talk separately about that for ages and happy to how that interacts with design if you're interested in it later, but I won't go into it. So these kind of drivers are making people's expectation of what a product is or a service is much harder for you to fulfill. And so if you don't start using design, you're going to be badly left behind. And yet, most people are not using design very well. In fact, as part of our research, we asked people, what are you doing now? 50% of companies don't talk to their customers at all about what they're creating. They have the kind of genius idea about how to create. Jättebra, yeah, exactly.
I think it's interesting that you put Steve Jobs together with the ethnographic work.
Yeah.
Because as far as I know, he famously did not do that.
Well, that's very true, yes. So in a sense, he's a more sophisticated audience than I had appreciated. Yes, so in a way, I don't like him, because he's like, design is about beauty, it's like the elegance of my products, and also I'm a genius, I wear a polo neck, and I tell you, I'm the god of design, I give it to you, And so I don't like that, that's true. Yes, you rumbled me there. But if you already understand that and you understand those trends, then you understand it. Yes, exactly. So, I prefer the grittier type of designers. Christian's one who actually go with the user a lot.
Yeah, but the themes that you brought up are sort of existing problems that you can work on with ethnographic work. But what he was designing is something that didn't exist yet.
Well,
people didn't know that they needed it.
Yes, so Henry Ford, who's the kind of Jobs of a previous era, he has this famous cliche thing about if I'd asked the people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. So you might say, well, the lesson is don't ask the people what they want, which I think is the wrong lesson. The lesson is if I'd spent time with the people, they would have described, I need a faster horse. And I would have then interpreted that, okay, so your underlying need is better transport. Let me do some prototypes and iterate and say, do you like this? Do you like that? I've got an air balloon. Is that working for you? I've got a horse with mechanical legs. Does this work for you? I've got a horse with a rocket on it. No, that doesn't work. I made a car, So I think listening to people doesn't mean that you eradicate your role as a kind of interpreter of it. And depending on the sort of sophistication of your consumer, like the drug addicts they work with, they are not good at knowing what the solution to their problem is. And they're only half good at describing it directly. If I sat them in a room and was like, so tell me about your life, and we do an abstract sort of set of questions, they're not great at, they're not very articulate guys. But if you then go and live with them and see them and ask them questions and do these things together, you get this very rich sense of what the real problems in their life are, some of which they tell you, some of which you just observe. Yeah.
Well, maybe also to say that I think there is a debate in the design community globally between user-centered approaches, the ethnography on the one side, and then the more traditional, you could say, expert-driven designer, which you could arguably say Steve Jobs or Jonty Ive who said, I would love to give this to people, I'll design this. But then after that, there's actually also a user engagement approach, right? Because of course, if you do that and it doesn't work for people, you have no success. So you could say Apple, of course, did lots of user testing, but they started in the right-hand side of your figure, in a sense, saying, let's build this and then see what people, how they respond, rather than start with ethnography, perhaps, right? So, but I think there's a schism in the design field between those approaches.
And sometimes you can look a bit the same, like Amazon starts by writing the press release for the product, and then they work back to see if people want it. And it's possible. I'm just saying it's more risky, and I don't like it so much. I don't think it's so morally good. So I don't like it for that reason. But it's possible. Yes?
I think it's important for companies to do a bit of both.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think if you go in and you involve all the time, you will not innovate as much and not just try. And I think it's a bit of both. I think a lot of people, they continue to learn and learn and learn and learn, and then they don't really put anything on the market that would actually move the market.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I think they have to learn and test and just try. And I think the fail ratio will be more or less the same, but then they put something on the market really quickly, and then it gives them the knowledge to actually try to test more?
Yeah, I think we're aligned because putting something on the market is a kind of quite big version of I'm going to test it with users.
Yeah.
So I would advise you to test it with users on a smaller scale before you put it on the market, but it doesn't mean let's delay endlessly because we should probably interview even more people.
Yeah.
So I think we're agreed. Yay, let's keep going. So lots of companies don't actually consider the user. It's not really a part of their process. I consider that a strong mistake. And lots of them, when they do the expert-driven, I have a dream, I have a wonderful product, they also don't even show that to the user, they just launch it, which I think is also a mistake. And when we asked design leaders, a lot of leaders were like, this design thing is sort of impossible to manage and know, and that's why they revert back to isn't it all about like genius, artistic sort of brilliance that you couldn't possibly measure? And so it's like, either I spend money on it and I just hope it goes well, or I don't spend any money on it because I can't tell if it's going to go well. So we decided we're going to work out, well, how important is design to making money? And this is a massive process. And there have been attempts to sort of guess this by asking people some surveys and seeing what they thought. But we want to do something more rigorous and more quantitative. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we did with the business value for design research as the method, and then I'll show you some of the results. So we looked at a lot of companies. I don't really know how it can be 250 plus. It's either, maybe we just stop counting at 250, but 250 and maybe more than that. I think it's because we keep doing the research and updating it. And what we did was we looked at their financial performance. We asked them for financial data, and we got 2 million pieces of financial data. And then we also interviewed them about what kind of behaviors they did, what we call design actions. So design action might be, I appointed a chief design officer onto my board, was an example of a design action. And we looked at what those design actions they were doing and how much money they were making, essentially, or how their financial performance was going. And then we stuck the two together to work out what design actions seem to be driving value and which ones drove the most value. So that's just in a nutshell what it is. There's quite a lot of methodology if you want to get into it in the report we could talk about. So what did it actually find, though? So we created this index, which is the kind of the score, where you take some questions and it tells you that correlates to what we know is good and bad. You answer a survey basically of questions. That then links through into the financial performance data we have, and then we're able to predict if you did more of this, you'd be good at that. You know, the money would go up. So we give you an index score. So what we found basically is that those who are excellent at design have better financial performance, but we can put numbers on that. So they increase their returns to shareholders about twice the level, depending on which industry you're looking at. So revenues, you can see, if you're in the bottom quartile of the index, like you do rubbish at all the design actions, this is your revenue increase per year from the sample that we were looking at. If you're in the top quartile, you can see it's going up more than twice as much in revenues. And TRS slightly, which is total return to shareholders, slightly less fast rate of growth, but still the difference between the bottom quartile is 15% and the top quartile is 21%. So we were able to actually put numbers on the fact that being good at design makes you more money. And this is true across all kinds of industries. So we've had a kind of hypothesis, this might be true if you worked in like fashion, but would it be true if you worked in automotive? Or would it be true if you worked in oil and gas? And not absolutely with every industry, but pretty much across many industries. We deep dived on 3, which were quite different. It was true. So we looked at consumer goods, where again, you saw that the top quartile's outperformance compared to the bottom quartile was really quite substantial. We then looked at medical devices, which is a sort of a product business, and that was very strong, the difference between ones that were great at design and ones that were not great at design. And then we looked at banking, which is maybe a kind of interesting mix of mostly service, but it has more and more digital component. And to some extent, there's also a question about like the sort of product that they're offering. And there was also an increase too. So it varies a bit. There are clearly some areas where being good at design is absolutely vital, like maybe if you run an architect firm or you're designing furniture, and areas where it's less important, but it's kind of true across many, many industries. But another interesting finding is that you don't just need to be good at design, you actually need to be awesome at it for it really to make much difference. So you might be a bit too far away to see the screen, but this is the 5-year CAGRs, so CAGR is a measurement of growth, against the quartiles. So these are the bottom quartile people here, about how they're growing their revenue. And I was just showing you the difference between this and this, but what you can kind of see is that, okay, it's better to be better, but it's really good to be awesome. And when it comes to shareholder return, it sort of doesn't make much difference whether you're in the first, the bottom, the second to bottom, or the third quartile. You kind of do the same. But once you get to the top quartile, right? So we don't just want to get a bit better at this, you want to master this. I think that's really interesting. So, now we talked a bit about what design is, why we should be interested in it now, and hopefully I've convinced you that it's worth being awesome at, but you already came to the talk, so maybe you think that already. Let's talk about how you actually win. So we kind of clustered the design actions into 12 areas, and then we put another label on top of that of 4 themes. So I'm going to talk to you about the 4 themes that show the strongest performance, because there's all kinds of design actions you could take, but these are like the ones that really move the needle. Oh, it's a bit small probably feedback there. So let me read it to you a bit more loudly. Here are the 4 ways of thinking about it. So on the top left, analytical leadership. This is basically about trying to drive design in your company like you try to manage cash flow, like you try to reduce costs. It's about being really rigorous about design. Companies that were really rigorous about design at the board level did very well. Then cross-functional talent. We call this sometimes more than a department. It's not just, I have a design department, it's full of fantastic designers and they do design. Everybody else does exactly what they did before. If you do that, you don't get the real value. It's about continuous iteration. So if you say, well, I did the design thing at the beginning of the process, designers are now no longer involved, now the manufacturing people are involved, or now the customer service people are involved, then that doesn't work either. You have to continuously be testing and learning and involving design, not just as a little area of your company, but through everything you do. When you do that, you get better financial performance. And it's about user experience. So you could say, I designed it really well and the technical performance is absolutely great, but the user experience of it is terrible. And companies that emphasize user experience ahead of other things, those are the ones that did best. So these are the attributes within design as a great big heading. Focus on being good at these 4 things. And today we're going to be mostly talking about the analytical leadership, but I'll talk you through all of them a little bit now. So, design is more than a feeling, it's about analytical rigor. And there are 3 sort of sub-elements of this that make the biggest difference, which are these little bullets. You'll see the same on the next couple of slides. So, so these sort of characteristics, double-clicking on what we mean by analytical leadership, they are creating a bold user-centric strategy, which basically means top-level people saying, I really want to be great at design and pleasing the user. That's going to be core to my business, and telling everybody about it. So you'll be familiar with like mission and vision statements, that kind of thing, but it's about making that really specifically about the user. So that's one of the first things you do. I think that's relatively easy to do because it's mostly words, but it's about disseminating those words into everybody's head and their behavior. The next one is also theoretically easy, although in fact can be quite hard, which is to embed design in the C-suite. So this means that the designer is not like the person who is, yes, has the cool glasses, but nobody listens to. The chief design officer has to be an important person that people do listen to, like they listen to the chief operations officer or other people like that. So bringing design into the heart of it, not making it kind of second or third tier. And in most companies it is. If it exists at all, it's second or third tier. So that's theoretically kind of easy. You start including their stuff in the board packs, they come to the meetings, they're on the board. But in fact, because it's political, that could be really hard. Yes?
From your experience from all this research in regard to embed design in C-suite, how important is it for the designer to understand and speak the lingo of the rest of the C-suite, the CFO and CEO and COO?
Yes.
You know, to kind of...
So it's sort of important in 2 ways. I mean, I think it's a very sensible point. So one way of saying it is, well, like everybody on the board is a board member and a specialist. So the chief HR officer, they need to be able to somewhat understand what the financial officer is talking about as well. And everybody has to be able to do it a bit. So they need to have that kind of base level. They need to be a board member, not just, I'm not really a board member, I'm just here because I got invited. They need to be a board member. And not just a board member, but throughout the structure of how things are run in the company. So that is important. But I think the more sort of beyond that question is, you're not going to be very successful if you hold this role, if you can't communicate with those other people and explain it in their priorities. So the CEO needs to be saying, I get it, I'm your ally, I want you to, we're changing the strategy, it's going to be about the user, you're going to be really important, that has to be there, otherwise you probably won't be in the room. But once you're in the room, if you're like, let me tell you all about fonts, then you're going to irritate people. It has to be like, we're talking about the user, who is our customer, who pays us, like they're the master. You have to make it about basically money. That's good. So being a good diplomat and a sort of subtle explainer, obviously a really important skill here, yeah. And the third one we're going to come back to a little bit more, because I think it's one of the hardest things in the whole toolkit to master, which is how are you going to measure design well? But that's key. And companies that don't measure it, it basically gets swept under the carpet, it's temporary, and it goes away. As with everything in business. Yeah. So that's the first one, we'll come back to it. The second one, design is more than a department. It's not about just a silo. It's about creating cross-functional teams. And people who work in technology will be familiar with a sort of agile methodology, which I think has really popularized this idea of cross-functional teams working towards a goal rather than separate departments that say separate. But it's very important that you've got a user-centric team of many talents working together. So in case you can't read it out at the back, the little bullets underneath say that the three sub-dimensions here are to nurture your design talent. Designers are in hot demand. There are not enough good designers. And so if you do not look after them and treat them nicely, they leave. Moreover, what gets designers doing good design is a slightly different experience from what gets people like me in my former life good. Like, we want to have an ergonomic keyboard and a massive screen so we can look at Excel for 25 hours a day. And they don't. So now when I came to work with McKinsey's design team, they were like, oh, it's 2 o'clock. We should go for a swim, which that doesn't happen in my normal McKinsey office where we're doing business consulting normally. So, but if you deny them those things, they'll probably leave. So they need to be nurtured, they need to be recognized, celebrated, and treated a little bit, special, which everybody should be. But these guys will leave if you don't do it. Secondly, make a cross-functional team. I mean, you can talk about collaboration, but if collaboration is coming to a meeting and everybody talking and then going back to their separate departments, that isn't really collaboration. Collaboration is that we're in the same team and we have different backgrounds and skills. So they need to sit together, they need to work together, they need to solve problems together. And they should be doing that with the legal department, the HR people, should be representatives of end users, a board, of financial people in a team together. Then it works well. And then you need to invest in design tools and infrastructure. So there are, designers they might have computer-aided design stuff. Some of the licenses for these things can be really expensive. They might need a certain kind of machinery in the workshop. And it can be pretty frustrating for them when people are like, can't you just use a pencil? And they're like, no, I can't. So spend money to make sure they have what they need to have. The third part is about, we call it more than a phase. So more than a phase is about iteration. Can I just want to, yeah?
Differ the teams when you talk about creating MVPs or POCs? So do you differ because some just kind of like to iterate and to
bring in new people?
Yeah. So when you kind of put new people on board,
yep.
Do you kind of consider if they would be better for the long-term design challenges or for the short terms, or how do you? Sure.
So we recommend putting together teams that are around particular customer problems, or if you don't yet know the problem, discovering the customer problems, and then they're solving like that problem, and they're in a sense not a permanent team. So you're not like, I know we manufacture vacuum cleaners, you're the large vacuum cleaner team, that's what you do. It's more like saying, well, we actually aren't selling anything, it seems, to people under 25. Your job is to discover why that is and do something about it. So you may possibly have 2 teams for the discovery and the next phase. It's probably better if you don't, and you have one team that solves that, and that might take them 3 months or 3 weeks or 3 years. And obviously you'll have people leave the firm, come in, rotate. But you try and sort of theme it around solving a real user problem. I think that works best, yeah. And they'll need refreshing, but the refreshment should come from people coming in and they're demoing what they do, and senior people or users or people from other departments coming, oh, that's interesting, and giving comment, but that's slightly different from like reporting to. They're not reporting to, they're solving the problem. Yeah. So continuous iteration. This is basically, you can skip this, but if you skip it, you're adding risk. So up to you. But I wouldn't do it. And design shuns the idea that if we go faster, we're and skip the iteration and the testing with the user, we're winning in some way. Which is like, no, you're building in risk. You're not like getting to market faster, you're just getting rubbish to market that isn't what you need faster. So spend time iterating to get to success. And so doing this needs a number of different elements. You've got to have a mix of quant and qual research. So don't be over heavy on quant or just qual. I mean, some very design-led firms are very qualitative based. You want to be trying to bring together a wide variety of different data sources. So the user is your kind of king, but you may have other kings, which might be the frontline employees who know things. It might be what your competitors are doing. It might be previous versions of products, or we do a lot of what's called analogous inspiration, which is going and looking at something which is not the same, but kind of is the same. So a classic example is working for the National Health Service in the UK, trying to improve productivity in operating theatres for surgery. A good place to go and work out how to do that is Formula One pit stop crews. They are doing the same thing, but it's sort of not the same thing. But it's the same thing. They're trying to do a process super fast in a tight team where they don't make any mistakes. So you can learn from those kind of things. You want to have a broad array of inputs coming into the team. And then the bottom bullet there is sort of what we've been emphasizing. You test, you refine it, you test it again, you test, refine, you do it again. Just embedding that process regularly. So that's a lot about how you organize the business as to when things are reported, what a due date or a deadline is, and whether there's an expectation at the senior level that things go in a linear way. You need to say, well, we're somewhat linear, but we might take some steps back, we might switch, might alter things, and they've got to understand that. Okay, I feel like we're running out of time. Is that true?
It's fine.
It's fine, okay.
10 more minutes.
Okay, jättebra. And then user experience, right. So the elements here that we need to focus on are about starting with the user. I think I've emphasized that a lot, but do not write a spec of what you want the thing to be and then see if the user likes it. See what the user likes and then write the spec of what the thing needs to be. You see this, the worst example I've seen of this is when I did some work for, how can I describe the client? A major European navy. And these guys, I said, so they were launching a new destroyer. It was a massive boat. It was meant to be the most advanced warship in the world ever. It's very exciting. They were very excited about it. And I said, this is amazing. So when did you guys start working on the ship? It must be, it's a big project. It went into the water in 2012. And the guy said, oh, yes, it has taken a while. We began in 1974. I was like, whoa, okay. And he's like, it's so advanced, it's amazing. I mean, it can fight in temperatures down to minus 45, in the North Atlantic. I was like, great, that's awesome, that sounds awesome. In the 70s, yeah, that sounds awesome. Where do you do most of your fighting now? They're like, oh, in the Persian Gulf, that's where we're patrolling now. I was like, cool, how's the air conditioning? Like, we have air conditioning, but because the ship is very heavily insulated because it's meant to patrol the North Atlantic, that means you have to run the air conditioning super hard, and all the power for that comes from the engines in the ship, and therefore when we turn the air conditioning on, the ship gets hotter because the engines are running so hard. Anyway, they had like 1,000 examples of where requirements were written in the 70s and it's just not what they need at all now. So don't do that. And then seamless experiences. So this is an emphasis on, we were talking about the linking of product and service and everything between. It's really tempting to have a department which is like, we all are designers, but I'm the digital designer and I do the digital. I'm taking care of the digital and you're taking care of the product, and you're not seamlessly designing them. And particularly if you do products that are going to be using something like Internet of Things. Obviously the digital and the physical and the service are all blended. Blend them together. And then thirdly, you want it to be something, ideally, which can integrate into third-party tools. So it's going to have a life beyond your narrow ecosystem that you design for it. And the iPhone, I think, is a great example of that. It's basically a platform that everybody else then created the content onto. Yes?
I'd like to ask you about the iterative process.
Yeah.
I'm a designer, and this is not really new to me, but,
sure.
But the most challenging part for me is the iterative process of building a design capacity within companies.
Yeah.
So how do you do that? Because this is kind of the end goal.
Mm-hmm. But how do you get there?
Yeah. But at least in a Danish context, it's often okay. We put you in the position to build design thinking in our organization. Now you have the job. So. Mm.
Why has it not happened yet?
Is there anyone else, or can I hire consultants? No, you got the job.
Yeah.
So what is your experience about building this capacity?
Oh, yeah, man. So what you're describing is very familiar. People are like, I went to the seminar, I read the report, I definitely love design. That's great. You're Mr. Design, please do the design thing. Okay, I'm going to go off and just carry on living my normal life like this. So that's not really what we're trying to say. And it goes back to the first piece about the build a bold user-centric strategy. you're touching on sort of a different non-design problem, which is companies that have strategies and don't do them, or don't really want to do them. And so how do you solve that route? I mean, that does have to quite strongly usually come from the top. There are examples of kind of more guerrilla organizations that sort of change themselves from the bottom. It's pretty unusual and quite hard to do. If you don't have the CEO, CFO, and CEO, and probably the board saying, this sounds like we need to do it, otherwise we're going to get killed, you probably will really find it hard. And they may pay more lip service, which is like, we're very proud of the design department, have a gold star for being designers. But they're not really building around the user. So I think, it does start with that like top level commitment that has to be believed. McKinsey has a massive organization practice, which is all about how do you change mindsets of first senior leaders and then everybody else. So there's an extensive body of work on that, which I'm not the authority on, and we could have a separate conversation about whether that would be a good thing to do a project for you on. But I mean, they have to basically believe that the platform is on fire or love it. And if they don't have one of those two things, you do find CEOs just like, it's so cool, I love it, I want to do it. We're doing something for a bank at the moment where the CEO went to the Stanford Design School and got totally inspired and wants to change his company. So that's great. But more commonly, they say, we're being slaughtered, why is this? And then somebody like me or BCG or whoever will come and say, well, you're probably being slaughtered for these reasons, we've done some data crunching. And one of them is you never listen to your customer, your products are not good. So maybe you should think about design. So ideally, we're not just saying design is good, do some design. We're saying change your company to listen to your users structurally. When you listen to them, then work out what products and services you should be doing. And then you need to do another stage, which is about coaching all this change in. And depending on how big your organization is, that can take years. I'm working for a company at the moment with nearly 400,000 employees. They want to be more design-centered. It will take some time. It doesn't necessarily take that long to get the message down to the frontline people. They're often like, good, I'm glad we're doing this. I've been saying for ages, the system's broken, it's impossible for me to use, the customers don't like it. But it can take ages if you have a thick middle management layer in your company, because the CEO will be like, yeah, let's do it. And the middle people are like, okay, I'm told I need to do this design thing, I don't really live it and care about it. That can take a super long time. Is that enough? I can talk maybe more about the hows of that a little bit later. But yes, your situation sounds like you have a root cause problem, which is they need to truly understand what design is and change the company. And it kind of goes to this thing about like more than a department. It's not like the design department now exists and now we're a design company. Yes. So we're going to just do a little bit more on analytical leadership specifically, because I think that's really important and hard to get right. And then we can go to more Q&A or stop if it's time to stop. So just a reminder, this is the slide that you saw earlier. These are the three parts of it. The user-centric strategy, as we were just talking about, it sounds simple, can actually be quite hard for people to really truly do it and decide that they want to do it, but it's a kind of decision commitment, not a technically complicated thing to do. Then putting it on the C-suite and elsewhere, depending on the size of your company, but really trying to find ways to make it part of your company. This third one, the design metrics, I want to spend some time on. It's possibly too small for you to be able to read there. But this is often the area where people struggle. And I would kind of break it down for you as to make it simple, three big things to do. First is you want to have a ton of metrics about outcomes. So the outcomes should be ones that you perhaps care about, can be in there, but they should really be ones that the customer cares about. So that might be asking the customer, is this product easy to use? Maybe that's something you want to do. So that's like an outcome, the result that they're feeling. Do you love this product? Would you recommend it to a friend? In the British Health Service, they've introduced a test for accident and emergency, for sort of emergency medicine, which is everybody gets asked, would you put your grandparents through this service? And if people say yes, that's a win, and if no, that's not, and that's tracked. Most of my background's in public sector, so often police or criminal agencies will be tracking how safe does the public feel. So these kind of end outcomes that you want to try and measure. So have some of those and put numbers on them. And the numbers can be from surveys, that's okay, but you want some kind of quantitative score that you ask the same sort of questions over time and you can track. So that's the kind of first chunk, outcome-based. The second chunk is the opposite, really, which is input-based. So if you've been spending lots of time with the user, you should know that there's some part of the existing product or process or service which breaks or is crucial for them. So an example here is Zalando, which is a US and Latin American shoe retailer. They knew that their online process was not very good because they would say to people, how easy was that, an outcome measure, and they would say, terrible. But when they went and did more of the ethnography and the design there with them, they worked out actually their hypothesis was, oh, it's terrible because it was hard to choose the shoe, or it was difficult to navigate the sort of buying thing. Actually, the buying thing was not so hard. Where people got really frustrated was specifically the checkout bit. And that was complicated. And really they needed to fix that bit. So once you've identified, hey, this is really where the blister forms, where the rubbing really happens, then you can put lots of input metrics about that, which is like time, it could be time to check out, it could be number of clicks it takes if it's a digital interface, it could be something that's more specifically about that pain point. And when they fixed that, they found a big improvement. You can also hear this intersects with what we were talking about earlier about big data. So you should be able to do quite a lot of data crunching about where user behavior changes, especially if you've got an online element to what you do. But it might be in your product, you might be getting data off the device. If you're doing a new vacuum cleaner or something, it might be telling you about usage. And so you can zoom in using that data and find particular moments where the process is breaking or the usage is dropping or adoption is dropping. And this is what Netflix is sort of famous for and really good at. So overall, they're tracking are people watching Netflix, but they also then are able to go in and say, the little image of what the film is that you see and you click on. They test that image. They have hundreds of different images for the Game of Thrones thing. So if you just want to watch Game of Thrones, when you log onto Netflix, you'll see a different picture to what somebody else sees, and that's based on what they know about you, and they're trying to get really specific about refining those sort of micro input moments. And then the final one, which I think is the most important, is make it bite. So make it bite means have a metric, yes, and then sort of slaughter or celebrate people based on it. And so Shark Ninja, they make electronics in Canada, and they give bonuses to their staff based on the Amazon star ratings. So they don't just say, we're going to track Amazon star ratings, and it's presented to the board. They pay people based on that, and then people get kind of serious about it. And you can also say you're going to be fired based on that. People get kind of serious about it. So if you're going to have a metric, don't just monitor it. Force it into people's lives as something that they care about. Pitney Bowes, when they do their customer surveys, if you mention somebody by name, then they give a bonus to that person, for instance. So that's an example of how you try and make the metrics really granular. Cool. I'm going to pause there because I expect we'll have some questions. And before we go on to questions, actually, if you are interested in how you are doing on design, the McKinsey Design Index has a kind of freemium version, or free version. You can go to this website, it's a little bit dark to read there, but it's just McKinseyDesignIndex.com. You put in your email address and it will ask you questions. It takes about 45 minutes to an hour to fill in. And it will then give you a headline score. If you want to pay a bit more, you can get more granularity and detail about where exactly, but it'll tell you I'm in the top or the middle or the bottom of the pile of people who've taken the index, which can be kind of helpful as a first starting point. Then there's options to get a bit more granular and have us come and facilitate workshops for you and things like that about what would you do about it, but that's just a free thing you can try now. This is my phone number and email address, and you're very welcome to get in touch with me if you have kind of further questions on this. We're going to be doing a workshop a little bit later this afternoon. But for now, if you have any questions, otherwise, thank you very much.
Oh, question! No clapping yet.
Yes.
Well, I just got curious, maybe a little provocative, but do you consider yourself more of a department in McKinsey?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So to pull back the curtain. Yeah. So the aspiration that I hold, and the other people who are kind of, I don't know if I can claim to be a leader of this, maybe I can, is that what traditional McKinsey is absolutely great at is strategy, structuring problems for people, bringing kind of clarity to the thinking, and often very quantitatively based. And kind of very fast, but also quite a linear process. So we'll come in and 6 weeks later, you have a really good answer, but it's kind of a sort of one-shot thing. And then we decided we better become better at helping people implement and deliver that. So we spent kind of the 5 years from about 2008 to 13, we were thinking about, okay, how do we get better at coaching in change so that the change happens? And then since 2013, I'd say the two big trends have been about digital and data analytics, so using those techniques, and then starting to be about design and user-centric strategy. So that's what we want to be able to do, is come to people and say, it's fantastic when you hire a small design agency, and they do probably some really good design. There's some amazing designers that work in the smallest firms. But can they kind of roll that together with numbers that prove their case and a change plan which will actually work, and can they take you through that change plan? And so I think part of the reason why design is not as embedded as it should be, because it's an amazing technique, is that many people hire a designer like you were kind of describing. They're like, we got the design thing, and then they try and build into the existing process in this kind of not very well working way. So we would like to be completely holistic, and we don't talk about who we consider to be our rivals or cast aspersions on them. There are many good firms, but there are a couple of people who've sort of tried to go more with a like design, innovation, consulting kind of thing, rather than just pure design. And I think we can beat those guys, and not just really beat them, but it's more about like do good stuff for clients. I think what clients really need is, okay, I heard the presentation or whatever, I liked that kind of stuff. Sounds very big shift. How do I do it? And to combine business strategy, the quant side and the qualitative side to create really good products, services, and a winning edge. And you should be building that in with also gathering the right kind of data, analyzing the data at the same time. And it's a pretty big project that is basically about going from old world companies to new world companies. And the quicker you do that transition, the more you'll completely smash up. I think there are such powerful techniques now. If you adopt those kind of very powerful techniques, I think you're absolutely industry winning, but it's hard to get the senior buy-in and awareness to do that. So that's the aim. And are we there yet? Well, the approach we took was we started hiring designers directly ourselves, and we also bought 3 design agencies. And so, but we want to be very careful with their culture, and it's kind of different. So the reason why this is so valuable is that our techniques are very different. That also makes it really hard to combine them. And there's a small group of people whose job it is to do that. I'm one of them. So yeah, we'll see. I'm working on it. So was there one? Yeah, please.
In a completely different direction, I'm really excited about this thing about basing your metrics on your users.
Mm-hmm.
Could you elaborate on how that might play out in a business-to-business company? Sorry, were you able to hear that?
So the question was about, I sort of talked a lot about consumer and user, and I wasn't talking, so it might have sounded not so much like I'm talking about B2B, but it totally does work for B2B. And in fact, I think some of our sort of biggest clients in this, like, I want to do the whole transformation to being this way, have been B2B companies, actually, industrial companies. And they recognize that actually their users want to provide more service, they want to innovate for their customers more. So they're now sort of, well, I used to make this kind of machine, now I need to make this kind of machine plus something digital, plus some kind of service I don't really understand. So they sort of feel the rub of that interlinking between the 3 things. I think maybe they feel it a bit earlier, perhaps. So they are doing that. As to what kind of metrics can be, with B2B, it can work quite well to ask the companies you sell to what it is you want that they would like to be continuously providing, and like co-design the metrics with them. And they can often say, yeah, well, I don't just want time to delivery or something. I particularly want time to delivery around Christmas time. Or what's super important to me is, can I cancel at the last minute? And things like that. They'll help you design the metrics. And the metrics should be completely grounded in what you do with the customer discovery. They shouldn't be like, we did all this, and now I think it's time to think about metrics. It should be, these are the list of things that people say are very important. I need to find a way of measuring that. Yeah.
One more question here. Well, actually, getting back, we just talked before you actually started about us as designers, consultants, working with CAQX, whatever.
Yeah.
We've become change agents more than designers.
Yeah, I totally agree.
What's your take on that?
Well, as with everything, the brain part of any problem is usually quite simple, and the heart part of any problem is usually quite difficult. But that's partly why I like design, because I think it's if it's done well, it's kind of fun. It can be a fun process to go through, and that can be actually surprisingly important, persuading people. And it goes back to what I was sort of saying about the raw confrontation with the user. So when I was doing the Detroit program on redesigning benefits, I was sitting with this lady who had 3 small children. She was on benefits, which is not great in any country. It's definitely not great in the US. And she was 19 years old, and we were in this community center with the light flickering on and off. And she was trying to fill in the form, the old form. And we were in hour 4 of her trying to fill it in. And I was just sitting watching her. And it got to this section which said, list all your liquid assets. And she looked at me, she's like, liquid assets, I've got some milk in the fridge, I'll put milk. But water that I get from the tap, what should I do? I don't know how much there is in the tap. And it was sort of a little bit funny, But it was also not funny at all, because she probably wasn't going to get her benefits, and that would mean she wouldn't be able to feed her kids. So it was totally real and important for her. And so when you say to somebody, the form's not very good, they're like, yeah. When you're like, this is what the form not being good actually means. It was way more stark for them. And they, when we went to talk to the people who ran this process, they were like, the form is designed for a reading age of a 9-year-old. So we were like, okay, well, here is a 9-year-old. One of the guys had a 9-year-old kid. So please try and fill in the form. Like, I've got 3 degrees, and I couldn't fill in this form. It's 42 pages long. And it asks you not just when your date of birth was, it asked you when your date of conception was. I was like, well, about 9 months before. Yeah, exactly. I think Dad's birthday is, so like you need to go and live it. And as soon as you live it, it gets super vivid, and then the change thing becomes overwhelming. Normally, I mean, I've never done it, and people have been like, I'm not persuaded. They're always like, whoa. Yeah.
Last question?
Well, just to follow up on that, it seems that in order for this kind of design work to be successful, some sort of mindset change is needed, especially in large organizations. So what's your take on going for the large-scale mindset change versus a Scott work thing that's made a small success, and how that can you showcase?
May I ask you to briefly repeat the question?
Yes, of course. So the question was, it sounds like a massive change you need to do. Should you try and go for sort of a big bang approach to this, or a kind of gradual skunk works, maybe? It's definitely much more powerful to see it than for me to explain it to you. So I would not advocate a presentation like this and then people are like, yay, we'll be designers, Maybe people who've already come to a session called design might, but most CEOs will be like, okay, I get a lot of these presentations about everything. I'm meant to change everything in my company all the time. So it definitely is good to do little shows and tells and start with small and easy things and show the improvements. And in that sense, I think it's kind of similar to digital design, where it's, the old way was like, right, scrap all our systems, build massive new system, and now you tend to do more like a microservices approach, where you change little parts of your website gradually over time, and you show small wins. I definitely think that is important. And having a bias to action is a kind of one of the core principles of good design thinking, is get on doing it. So skunkworks, yes. The problem is you may not have the chance to create the skunkworks. So what can you do? If you're the CEO, maybe you can do a lot. If you're a middle manager, you may have some kind of budget, and you may be able to adopt some of the design methods, and just don't lead with like, I'm going to do some design, watch me. Do like, oh, your results were rather good this year. Oh, well, yeah, I was using this design thing, right? So you can lead a little bit more that way. Actually, when I was, before I joined McKinsey, when I was a manager of a bit of public service, I had some spare money, not much, but a bit. And I said, well, we're just going to solve this. I didn't say it's a design project. I was like, we're just going to try and solve this. And we hired ethnographers and had to do a bit of sort of accounting voodoo. But as soon as we had the ethnography, people were gripped. So yes, skunk works. But I do sort of broadly think it will be very hard to do this if nobody cares. Yeah, it will be hard. But they should care, because I've just told you it makes you more money. So lead on that. Yeah.
As my daughter used to say, final.
Final. Just a very small comment. There's actually done research on how you embed design in small and medium-sized companies. There's a researcher called Jonty Ackling. She surveyed a great number of small and medium-sized companies, and found that the most effective way of introducing an embedded design were the so-called Trojan horse strategy. So you basically start building knowledge and understanding of design processes in one department, but in a department where there are individuals who have access to the next level and who can sort of build it slowly up. That's the most sort of quantitative, the most effective way of doing it. This is a study which is 8-10 years old, so it might have changed, but it might be a good way.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds great. Yeah, I agree.
Thank you very much. Jonty will reappear later.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
As he, in collaboration with Prana, who's sitting down there, will be doing this seminars workshop. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thanks, guys. Thank you.